There are deep secrets within the British royal family that seem destined to remain buried forever behind the heavy, gilded doors of the palace, protected by centuries of strict protocol and absolute silence. But this time, the eye of a devastating emotional storm centers directly on the two most powerful, iron-willed women in the modern Windsor family. Everything began unexpectedly at the glamorous 11th birthday party of Princess Charlotte, held at the very end of May. Amid glittering crystal chandeliers, multi-tiered exquisite cakes, and heartfelt family toasts that echoed through the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, Princess Anne suddenly noticed something that made her entire body freeze. Camilla was wearing a sparkling jewelry set that looked utterly identical to the priceless sapphire heirlooms once belonging to the late Queen Elizabeth II. When quietly questioned in a corner, Camilla casually insisted they were merely modern custom designs inspired by classic royal style, waving her hand dismissively with a graceful smile. But that superficial explanation did absolutely nothing to dispel Anne's growing suspicions. The more the Princess Royal reviewed recent images and mental archives, the more she discovered terrifying coincidences that could hardly be considered accidental or standard. Is this merely an unfortunate misunderstanding among stressed royal family members, or has Princess Anne unwittingly stumbled upon a dark, calculated secret that someone is desperately trying to conceal at all costs to protect their position? Buckingham Palace had sparkled under the dazzling light of countless chandeliers that evening, with the joyful laughter of children echoing throughout the grand historic hall. Princess Charlotte's 11th birthday party unfolded both warmly and solemnly, serving as a rare, significant family event amid an incredibly busy and tense royal schedule. The beautiful cake was exquisitely decorated, balloons floated gently against the ancient ceilings, and expensive gifts were carefully wrapped in royal colors. King Charles sat comfortably at the center of the room, smiling happily at his family, while beside him stood Prince William and his wife, Princess Catherine, hand in hand, projecting an image of perfect unity. Charlotte darted about radiantly in her pristine white dress, her young eyes sparkling as she received well wishes from everyone present. Princess Anne, however, stood slightly apart in a quiet corner of the room, as was her long-standing habit. As the only daughter of Queen Elizabeth II, Anne had always maintained a stern, uncompromising demeanor, speaking very little but observing her surroundings with extreme, predatory sharpness. She carried the heavy, unseen responsibility of protecting the sacred moral legacy her late mother had left behind. Today, she had watched proudly as young Charlotte grew up day by day, deeply hoping the young girl would eventually inherit the most meaningful, symbolic gifts from her late grandmother. But then, in a single, quiet moment, the festive atmosphere suddenly shifted entirely for Anne. She happened to glance toward Camilla, who was chatting cheerfully with some high-ranking palace officials. Queen Camilla wore an elegant, custom long gown with a practiced, graceful smile on her lips. Yet, what made Anne completely freeze in place was the blinding, sparkling jewelry set resting on Camilla's neck and wrists. It was a large, deep blue sapphire necklace, harmoniously paired with matching earrings and a heavy bracelet. The set was almost entirely identical in every intricate detail, unique color tone, and specific diamond arrangement to the priceless heirloom Queen Elizabeth II had specifically bequeathed to young Charlotte before her passing. Anne felt her chest tighten fiercely as a wave of cold shock washed over her. She remembered her mother's final, intimate instructions as clearly as if they were permanently etched in stone. Those specific sapphires were meant for the grandchildren, especially Charlotte, because they were not merely material jewelry, but sacred symbols of their direct bloodline and ancient royal tradition. The near-perfect resemblance left Anne utterly unable to believe her eyes, and she knew in her heart that this was absolutely no random coincidence. Anne clenched her fists tightly against her dress, a massive wave of sudden anger and deep outrage surging within her veins. How could Camilla dare to wear something intended specifically for the young granddaughter? It was not only a blatant, arrogant violation of palace protocol, but a grave, unforgivable disrespect to the historical legacy the entire family had preserved through painful generations. Throughout the remainder of the party, Anne tried her absolute best to maintain a calm public composure, participating in the basic activities while her mind churned nonstop like a runaway engine. As the external guests gradually departed and the overall atmosphere finally calmed down, Anne decided to confront her directly. She approached Camilla with a stern, immovable expression that broadcasted immediate danger. Queen Camilla, Anne spoke, her voice calm yet terrifyingly heavy with natural royal authority. "The jewelry set you are wearing today looks very familiar to me. Isn't that the exact historic piece Elizabeth left specifically for Charlotte?" Camilla spun around abruptly at the sound of her name, the practiced smile remaining glued on her lips, and caught a fleeting, distinct flash of sharp tension and panic in her eyes. "You are quite mistaken," and Camilla replied lightly, her tone breezy as she adjusted her posture. "These are my own private custom designs. I recently drew personal inspiration from classic royal style. It is incredibly easy to confuse them, but they were specially made just for me by contemporary jewelers." And looked her straight in the eye, her gaze cutting through the defensive facade. "Similar to that exact extent? Even the precise arrangement of the rare sapphires and the highly intricate framing details of the gold?" Camilla chuckled softly, waving her hand dismissively as she prepared to exit the conversation, stating that many talented jewelers create pieces in highly similar styles these days. The brief, tense conversation ended right there, and Camilla quickly turned away to blend into the remaining crowd, and stood completely motionless in the center of the hall, her dark suspicions growing stronger and more solid by the second. That night, back in the complete privacy of her quarters, and could not sleep a single wink. She opened her phone and reviewed the high-resolution party photos again and again, zooming in on the sparkling jewelry resting on Camilla. She muttered quietly to herself that this could not possibly be a mere coincidence, and the very next morning, Anne began her quiet, highly confidential investigation. For her, this was no longer about a single set of beautiful stones. It was the absolute beginning of a silent, dangerous battle to protect the honor and sacred legacy of the royal family that her mother had entrusted directly to her care. In the tense days following Princess Charlotte's birthday party, Princess Anne simply could not shake the vivid image of those sparkling blue gems on Camilla's neck. She became noticeably more reserved and distant, participating significantly less in daily palace activities and spending almost the entirety of her time locked inside her private office. The desk lamp burned consistently through the dark nights, and the computer screen glowed continuously with numerous high-definition photos and videos spanning Queen Camilla's recent public events. And watched and rewatched every single piece of footage, pausing at every frame, zooming in closely, and comparing each minute detail meticulously against historical records. Every time Camilla had appeared in public recently, she wore pieces that made Anne startle with disbelief, from a large emerald necklace at last month's diplomatic ceremony to radiant sapphire earrings during an official foreign visit. All were dangerously identical to items held within the late Queen's ultra-secure private collection. "This cannot be a mere coincidence. They are far too similar," and whispered into the empty room, her voice a mix of deep anxiety and rising, unstoppable fury. Anne decided to conduct a highly discreet but rigorous internal inspection, contacting the Royal Vault manager directly, the sole repository of the monarchy's most sacred material treasures. The ensuing phone conversation left her even more stunned and deeply unsettled. "Your Royal Highness, a few weeks ago, some specific jewelry boxes were temporarily removed under special, highly confidential orders," the manager reported, his voice noticeably hesitant and tight with palpable fear. "But the internal records are completely incomplete, lacking proper authorizing signatures and specific timestamps, as I only followed urgent instructions from much higher up," and gripped the wooden armrest of her chair until her knuckles turned completely white. "Who gave that specific order, and for what exact purpose?" She pressed hard, her voice dropping an octave. The manager merely shook his head over the line, his voice growing quieter and more terrified, stating that he wasn't entirely sure because it came directly from above, and everything was executed with extreme speed. However, when Anne demanded an urgent, surprise inventory immediately after the birthday party. All the genuine items were suddenly found completely intact inside the heavy vault, properly sealed with no items missing whatsoever. The logical hypothesis that Camilla had simply stolen or permanently used the genuine pieces seemed to collapse entirely on the spot, and stood before the sturdy, bulletproof glass display cabinets in the vault, her eyes darkening and her heart filled with immense confusion. How was this even possible? Everything was perfectly accounted for in the books, yet the physical similarities in the photos and videos were completely undeniable. Suspicions in Anne's sharp mind grew with every passing hour, and she began to consider a far more sophisticated, dark, and dangerous possibility. Someone had deliberately removed the real jewelry for a very short window of time, perhaps only a few hours for the public appearance, used it under the bright cameras, and returned it quickly before the official inventory could ever take place. This was not an ordinary, clumsy theft, but a highly systematic, protected misuse covered up perfectly by extremely skillful, master-crafted replicas designed to fool the eye during quick inspections. They planned every single step meticulously and told herself, her voice low with absolute determination and righteous outrage. In the following long, exhausting nights, and barely slept, arranging complex timelines of public events on a large whiteboard hidden in her room, marking Camilla's appearances with the suspicious jewelry and comparing them directly to the official vault inventory schedules. Each indirect piece of evidence fueled the flames of suspicion in her even more fiercely, making her feel both furious at the blatant disregard for her mother's memory and profoundly saddened by the potential betrayal occurring at the very heart of the royal family. She knew she could not act rashly, as there was no direct, irrefutable physical evidence yet, only vague fragments that a clever lawyer could easily dismiss. But Anne's powerful intuition as the trusted daughter of Elizabeth II told her this was a massive, calculated operation. Suspicion had officially grown into an ironclad resolve, and Anne was fully determined to follow this treacherous trail to the very end, no matter the massive difficulties, internal conflicts, or public scandals that lay ahead. The internal atmosphere within the private corridors of Buckingham Palace grew heavier with each passing day, like a thick, unbreathable fog settling over an unspoken battlefield. For Princess Anne, the discovery that the real royal heirlooms were still physically resting inside the vault did not signal the end of her investigation, but rather the opening of a much more complex and dangerous labyrinth. She realized with absolute certainty that she was not dealing with a simple case of unauthorized borrowing, but a highly organized, masterfully executed deception that required immense resources and absolute administrative complicity. To understand how someone could bypass the most stringent security protocols in the United Kingdom, Anne knew she had to shift her focus from the cold, bulletproof glass cabinets of the royal vault to the human network operating behind them. Her sharp, analytical mind began to reconstruct the entire operational mechanism from scratch, reasoning that if the genuine pieces were returned within mere hours to escape detection, there must be a parallel shadow collection of identical replicas used to maintain the illusion during regular audits. This meant that the exquisite jewelry Queen Camilla had proudly displayed under the blinding flashes of the international press was, at various times, a mixture of calculated historical reality and perfect material illusion. The psychological weight of this realization pressed heavily against Anne's chest as she spent long, sleepless nights analyzing the institutional vulnerability of the monarchy she had sworn to protect. She understood that a crime of this magnitude could not be perpetrated by a single person acting in isolation, no matter how high their royal status might be. It required a network of absolute loyalty, secured through a combination of immense financial incentives, professional leverage, and the sheer overbearing pressure of supreme royal authority. Anne's investigation soon moved into a much more active and dangerous phase as she began to discreetly track the secret financial movements and private meetings of the key palace staff who held the physical keys to the kingdom's treasures. The daughter of Elizabeth II possessed an innate understanding of palace dynamics, knowing exactly which threads to pull without alerting the broader court or triggering an immediate defensive reaction from the highest offices of the land. She focused her initial efforts on uncovering the physical origin of the flawless replicas, deducing that a contemporary craftsman capable of matching the ancient, unique cuts of historical royal gemstones must belong to an elite, highly restricted circle of European jewelers. Through a series of confidential inquiries conducted through trusted, lifelong external contacts, Anne began to map out the quiet visits of specific private couriers who had entered the secondary gates of Clarence House under the cover of routine administrative deliveries over the past 24 months. Each piece of indirect data she gathered systematically narrowed the circle of suspicion, pointing toward a highly confidential contract signed with a master jeweler in continental Europe, bound by a multi-million-pound silence agreement that left no official paper trail within the United Kingdom. But discovering the external supply chain was only half the battle. The far more painful and critical task was identifying the internal betrayal that allowed the genuine items to leave the vault in the dead of night. And spent countless hours reviewing the internal personnel logs, tracking the sudden, unexplained lifestyle changes or structural promotions of the junior vault technicians and security guards who had been on duty during the specific dates she had marked on her hidden whiteboard. It was a tedious, emotionally draining process that forced the Princess Royal to confront the unsettling reality that the absolute loyalty her mother had commanded for 7 decades was slowly eroding under the pressure of new personal ambitions and internal palace politics. The burning fury that had initially fueled her action at Princess Charlotte's birthday party gradually transformed into a cold, clinical determination to expose the entire apparatus of deceit before permanent damage could be inflicted upon the Crown's institutional integrity. Every single document she scrutinized, every irregular timestamp she uncovered, and every sudden silence she encountered when questioning old palace servants served as an undeniable confirmation that she was on the absolute right path. The turning point in her silent crusade came when a detailed comparison of the vault's digital access logs revealed a recurring, microscopic anomaly. On the nights preceding Queen Camilla's major public appearances, the automated security system recorded brief, 4-minute power fluctuations that effectively blinded the external surveillance cameras covering the secondary transit corridors. This was not a mechanical failure, but a deliberate, highly technical intervention performed by someone with intimate, expert knowledge of the palace's modern infrastructure. And felt a cold shiver run down her spine as she realized the sheer scale of the conspiracy. The rot had reached far deeper into the security apparatus than she had originally estimated. She knew that a single misstep on her part, a single premature accusation without irrefutable physical proof, would allow the perpetrators to completely erase the remaining evidence and paint her as an eccentric, overly suspicious relative driven by personal animosity. The political stakes were unimaginably high, as a public fracture between the king's sister and the king's wife would plunge the modern monarchy into an unprecedented constitutional crisis at a time when institutional stability was desperately needed. Yet, the memory of her mother's final, sacred whisper in the quiet rooms of Windsor Castle acted as an unshakable anchor for her soul, forbidding her from taking the easy path of diplomatic silence or passive compliance. As the days blurred into weeks, the intense psychological pressure began to take a visible toll on Anne's demeanor, making her even more unapproachable and severe during the few public engagements she could not avoid. Her sharp eyes became permanent fixtures of intense scrutiny, sending waves of anxiety through any palace official who dared to meet her gaze across the ceremonial rooms. She knew that news of her persistent inquiries had likely reached the inner circle of Clarence House, and that a powerful, invisible counteroffensive was already being organized in the shadows to neutralize her efforts. The quiet palace corridors, once symbols of historical continuity and serene majesty, had officially transformed into a high-stakes psychological chessboard where every move could lead to total victory or absolute ruin. And adjusted her strategy accordingly, retreating further into absolute operational secrecy, while keeping her trusted personal aide on constant alert for any sudden changes in vault personnel or unexpected modifications to internal administrative records. She was a seasoned veteran of royal life, fully aware that a cornered adversary with immense institutional power would eventually make a desperate, aggressive error in judgment out of sheer panic. And that critical error was exactly what she was patiently waiting for, standing as a solitary, unyielding sentinel guarding the historical honor and material legacy of the House of Windsor against the creeping tide of modern personal ambition. The silent chess match within the royal corridors rapidly approached its absolute breaking point as rumor of Princess Anne's dynamic investigation leaked directly into the inner sanctum of Clarence House. When Queen Camilla's personal assistant entered her private dressing room with a trembling voice and a pale face, the atmosphere instantly hardened into ice. Camilla, staring at her own reflection in the historic gilded mirror, felt a cold knot of severe panic tighten in her chest, knowing that Anne was not a conventional adversary who could be easily intimidated by titles or royal status. Realizing that her entire carefully constructed reputation was on the verge of total collapse, Camilla immediately shifted from passive defense into an aggressive, high-stakes counteroffensive. She privately summoned the royal vault manager, leveraging past institutional favors and delivering a cold, unyielding ultimatum over a secure line to ensure that all previous administrative statements remained completely unchanged. She ordered the immediate erasure of digital access anomalies, causing critical handover receipts to mysteriously vanish from the central database overnight, while several potential internal witnesses suddenly developed severe memory lapses or went on extended, mandatory leaves. But this frantic, over-coordinated cover-up became the fatal mistake that Anne was patiently waiting for, as the sudden wall of absolute non-cooperation and the unnatural alterations in historical logs served as glaring beacons pointing directly toward the highest levels of palace authority. Recognizing that the time for quiet observation had passed, Anne launched a decisive direct strike by arranging an immediate, completely private meeting with Camilla at Balmoral Castle on a bleak, drizzly afternoon. In the suffocating tension of the small sitting room, stripped of assistants and formal witnesses, and laid out her indirect evidence with a clinical, razor-sharp precision that created immense psychological pressure. When Camilla angrily lost her composure and shouted that she had only borrowed the heirlooms for short intervals to serve the monarchy's grand public image, she unwittingly admitted to details that only the direct instigator of the scheme could possibly know. Camilla did not realize until it was far too late that Anne had activated the high-fidelity recording function on her secure device from the very first second of the confrontation, capturing the self-incriminating outburst with flawless clarity. Armed with this undeniable audio confession, Anne presented the entire systematic misuse to King Charles, leading directly to the convocation of an emergency, closed-door family tribunal in the solemn historic halls of Balmoral. King Charles sat at the head of the long table, his face deeply etched with profound exhaustion and historical disappointment, flanked by a grave Prince William and a silent, resolute Princess Catherine. As the audio recording echoed through the deathly silent room, alongside the testimony of retired vault personnel and the timeline of unauthorized midnight transits, Camilla's remaining defenses crumbled entirely into dust. Under the crushing weight of irrefutable proof and the stern gazes of her family, Camilla finally bowed her head in total defeat, tears flowing down her face as she softly admitted to abusing her supreme privileges to access the sacred collection outside of official regulations. The immediate internal aftermath was swift and absolute. King Charles signed strict new oversight measures implementing 24/7 biometric surveillance and multi-signatory protocols for the royal vault, while the compromised staff faced immediate termination and intense internal investigation. Within days, highly specific details of the confrontation leaked into the international press, causing catastrophic damage to Queen Camilla's public standing as headlines blasted her disregard for the late monarch's personal legacy. She was quietly withdrawn from the public eye and suspended from official royal duties, forced to endure the agonizing isolation of public alienation and family distrust. Standing alone on the windy balcony of Balmoral, looking out over the misty green hills where her mother had spent her happiest days, Princess Anne felt no triumphant joy, only a deep, somber sorrow for the structural wounds inflicted upon her family. Yet, as the cold wind brushed past her face, the Princess Royal whispered a quiet promise to the heavens, knowing that her mother's sacred material and moral legacy had been successfully defended against the creeping rot of personal ambition. The historic scandal closed behind a wall of permanent security, leaving behind a lasting, powerful reminder that even within the highest ranks of supreme royalty, deception cannot remain hidden forever from the unyielding eyes of true duty and absolute loyalty.